So you got to love Dillian Whyte, you know. You got to love Dillian Whyte. He's a proper character in the sport of boxing, and he's authentic. And I think people like authentic people. A few days ago on IFL TV, Bryant Jennings, a heavyweight I'm a fan of, a heavyweight who I consider borderline top 10 in the world, does an interview. And he says something like, these heavyweights can't live with me. Dillian Whyte can't live with me. It's something to that effect. He may or may not have included various expletives. But it was, you know, I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but if you want a direct quote, go and watch the interview, you know. But anyway, so that was at the final press conference. Bryant Jennings is a sparring partner for David Haye, which is pretty high-class sparring in my opinion. You know, I think Bryant Jennings is probably a more formidable opponent than Tony Bellew, but that's another video perhaps. But anyway, so Bryant Jennings comes over to support David Haye. He makes that comment. To be fair to Bryant Jennings, he was specifically asked about fighting UK heavyweights. It's not like he decided to come over and call out Dillian Whyte. So what happens today? Dillian Whyte turns up to the weigh-in and, in his own words, steps to Bryant Jennings and sticks it on him and asks Bryant Jennings for a fight, bare knuckle, at the O2, at the weigh-in. You know, at some point, someone is going to take Dillian Whyte up on his offer to fight in a car park, and it's going to involve in someone going to prison. But I'll tell you what, Dillian Whyte is doesn't appear to be a man to be messed with. You know. Anyway, so he turned up today, and clearly Bryant Jennings. You know, a lot of people will be critical of Bryant Jennings for this, but in my opinion, he made the very, very sensible decision to say that he's a professional boxer. He fights at a high standard in the ring for a fee. And no, he didn't want to go toe-to-toe, bare knuckle with Dillian Whyte at a weigh-in where he was there to support one of his mates. But anyway, this fight is building, and it's potentially a very, very interesting fight. You know, it's a fight that I think stylistically weighs up quite nicely. From Eddie Hearn's perspective, I guess Bryant Jennings is a guy who doesn't carry a lot of natural punching power. And he's coming off back-to-back losses. You know, Vladimir Klitschko loss and a Luis Ortiz loss. And since then, he's been painfully inactive. And, you know, I know a lot of fans of the heavyweight division want to see Bryant Jennings back in a proper fight. So, you know, I guess from that perspective, the timing could be right for Dillian Whyte to have a fight with him. From Dillian Whyte's perspective, you know, I know Eddie Hearn was clearly keen to make that Chisora rematch, but that's been slow progress. You know, we've not had any news there. Dillian Whyte was talking today that he wants a real big payday for that fight, and I don't know if Eddie Hearn's going to be able to flog that as a pay-per-view event. So I'm not sure if the big paydays exist unless you're able to flog it as a pay-per-view event. You know, Whyte versus Chisora, I'm sure it would sell a lot of tickets. I'm sure it would with Hearn promoting it, but you know, Derek Chisora, Dillian Whyte, these aren't people who have massive fan bases. You know, they're not guys, to my knowledge, you know, I could have got this wrong, but like, I don't know, if you know, if Anthony Crolla fights in Manchester, even if he fights a low level of opponent, you know, he's got 5,000 Manchester fans who just turn up to the fight. Yeah, I'm not sure that Chisora and Whyte have these massive fan bases that would sell out the O2 or sell out an arena like that. So, you know, I don't know how big that Whyte Chisora fight is. I think from a perspective of, would people love to watch it if it was on free TV, and would people like to have a few beers with their mates and watch it? Yes. But is it a kind of fight that's going to do 500,000 pay-per-view buys and flog out an arena? I'm not sure it is actually, even though the first fight was such a barn burner. So, you know, they've got that option. Dillian Whyte seems to be calling out Deontay Wilder's name a lot, but, you know, let's face it, Deontay Wilder isn't going to be facing Dillian Whyte anytime soon. He's got, you know, he's going to be fighting Bermain Stavern in his next fight, and possibly after that he's going to be facing Dominic Breazeale. And, you know, if Wilder wants to have a meaningful fight, and I'm not clear that he does because he hasn't in his career so far to date, but if he wants to have a meaningful fight, he can do it against much bigger named, bigger money opponents than Dillian Whyte. You know, fights with Joshua, Parker, Haye, Klitschko, those sort of names are on the table for a guy like Deontay Wilder. So I don't see him wanting to fight Dillian Whyte because, if you want to have a step up, you want to get paid the mega bucks for it. And Dillian Whyte, he's a known name, don't get me wrong, but he's not the mega bucks. So, yeah, Dillian Whyte is in a kind of weird position at present where his profile's quite good, but he's kind of at that stage where he's not a headline pay-per-view fighter. He's not a headline selling out arenas fighter. But he's kind of at the point where, I guess being a heavyweight, he's asking for financial reward and he's asking for magnitude of fights that Eddie Hearn has not historically delivered on free-to-air Saturday night fights. So he's in an interim position, as I consider it, and he was being very, very critical of Eddie Hearn in an interview today with IFL TV, saying that Eddie needs to show him some love. I think that's what he said. I think that's the phrase he used, and he's trying to build his career. And the Bryant Jennings fight kind of is one that makes sense. Dillian Whyte's one of these guys who, claims he'll fight everyone, and I'm sure he will. But there's a lot of dangerous heavyweights out there. And, there was talk of Whyte fighting Luis Ortiz. Luis Ortiz is, I think there's a difference in the heavyweight division. You have dangerous fighters, and you have very, very good fighters who maybe are not dangerous. David Price is not an elite level fighter, but he's a very dangerous fighter because he's got a big punching power. He's 6'8". Someone like David Haye is one of the most dangerous fighters you'll see. He's super athletic, super explosive, super fast, hard hitting. Luis Ortiz is a dangerous fighter. Bryant Jennings is a very, very good fighter, but he's not dangerous. If Whyte fights Bryant Jennings, you're not going to be thinking, bloody hell, Dillian Whyte might take a hiding here that will damage the rest of his career, or Dillian Whyte might get hideously knocked out. Bryant Jennings is not that kind of threat. So, I guess it's a fight that does make sense. I think Jennings, he's got very oversized reach. He's a real long arms for a guy who isn't a massive height and frame, but he's got real oversized reach. I know Dillian Whyte's got big reach as well. Jennings also has very, very good legs. He's a guy who moves and can use the width of the ring and the full scope of the ring very, very well. And based on what I've seen in Dillian Whyte's recent fights, I actually think that I would give Bryant Jennings a slight edge in this matchup, despite the fact that he has been inactive and despite the fact he's coming off 2 back-to-back losses, because I think the style that Bryant Jennings brings could cause real problems for Dillian Whyte, actually. I think he could make Dillian Whyte miss a lot. I think he could establish his jab against Dillian Whyte. I think he could counterpunch against Dillian Whyte. And whilst I'm not sure he's got the power to necessarily stop Dillian Whyte, it wouldn't surprise me if Bryant Jennings could wear him out and use the size of the ring against him and maybe score an upset. From Dillian Whyte's perspective, a win over a guy like Bryant Jennings would be by far the best win of his career to date. I think Dillian Whyte's best win has got to be Derek Chisora. And that was a very, very close, controversial decision, as you guys know. Now, I personally have can you say Derek Chisora is a top 20 heavyweight? Yes, you can. Bryant Jennings is a good bit above Chisora for my reckoning. He's still on borderline top 10. Listen, Bryant Jennings has actually got some credible form. He knocked out Arthur Spilka. He perhaps took care of Spilka better than Deontay Wilder did. He beat Mike Perez, who's a guy I rated very, very highly. And there's other bits and pieces of form on Jennings' resume as well. So, it's a fight that I'd like to see. I'd like to see Dillian Whyte back in the ring. I'd like to see him in a meaningful fight. It's been a while. He's been rested for a few weeks or a few months even. And always good as a heavyweight boxing fan to see a guy like Bryant Jennings in a meaningful fight and back in the mix. And the winner of that fight certainly cements themselves as a top 10 heavyweight for me. But, I'm not saying it's necessarily going to happen. Heated beef confrontation at the press conference today, however you want to phrase it. Dillian Whyte is a guy who, because of his antics, builds fights, and potentially that's a fight to be built. He did mention that he was looking at the Brazil fight after Brazil beat Agonu, and I certainly would rather see Jennings than Brazil. I think Jennings is a more meaningful fight. But anyway, that's my thoughts, guys. Leave your comments in the section below. Who are you picking in that Jennings versus Whyte fight if it did happen? And what do you make of the press conference antics, the weigh-in antics today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Do hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed the video. If you're new to the channel or you haven't done so before, please take the time to subscribe. My icon's on the screen somewhere, probably around here right now, so click on the logo and there's an option to subscribe, or you can subscribe via the normal means. Many thanks indeed for tuning in, people. Appreciate it.